The president's pin and phone method of governing has had its day in court again after the Supreme Court justices heard arguments earlier today on whether or not the EPA exceeded its authority when it wrote the rules regulating greenhouse gases. 4 justices seemed to back the EPA, but Justice Kennedy, who's seen as the swing vote here, told the EPA lawyers that he can't find precedent to support its position that it has the power to extend the Clean Air Act without engaging Congress. The decision, expected in June, could largely affect President Obama's use of executive orders. Helping me sort this out is David French, senior counsel at the American Center for Law and Justice. He joins me now for Q&A. David, explain this case to me and bring us up to date. I understand it's technically 6 cases in one, and this particular case that we're talking about is the lead one. So what's going on, and how did this play out in court today?
This case is incredibly complex, but I'll try to distill it down. Essentially what we're talking about is that the EPA is going to be regulating greenhouse gas emissions from cars and light trucks and the such. And historically what that means is as soon as the EPA regulates emissions from cars, it also means it's regulating emissions from stationary objects, like, say, a factory. Well, if you extend that into greenhouse gases, just with the way that the weight of greenhouse gases and the way the science works, if you use the same rules to apply to greenhouse gases that apply to, say, coal plants and other things like that, you would end up with the EPA regulating and granting permits even for large homes, for apartment buildings, an unbelievable expansion of EPA power. So the EPA on its own said, hey, we're going to interpret this a little bit differently, or I mean a lot differently from Congress. And so that is what this is about. The EPA has gone out and has written regulations that are dramatically different from the actual reading of the statute itself, which should control this case. So this is a situation where the EPA is essentially rewriting the law to accomplish its objectives and is being called out for it before the Supreme Court.
And how did you see that going today when the Supreme Court did hear it? Did you really see, how did you feel that Justice Kennedy in particular, because really he's the guy that matters in this case, he's the one that seems to only have not really made up his mind. Do you think that they're leaning towards the EPA or away from them?
Let me begin with a standard caveat. It's really tough to judge anything from oral argument. There were some promising signs for those of us who want to see executive power limited in Justice Kennedy declaring that there was no precedent that really strongly supported the government's position. So that was a promising sign, but we'll see. Let's not forget, though, that the Supreme Court has already, in recent rulings, extended the EPA's authority to regulate in this area. So if the Supreme Court goes against the EPA here, it will be reversing the recent trend. So where this is going to go is anyone's guess. But if it endorses the EPA, then that is a strong, that is a really negative turn for those who believe that the president's pin and phone strategy is unconstitutional.
And if it doesn't go the way of the EPA, it will. A lot of people are saying that this case is a lot bigger than just climate change because it does deal with this pattern that we've seen of using executive orders. And since this is really the second case that the Supreme Court has seen during this term, the first one being the National Review of the Labor Board, what do you think the practical implications of this would be if it goes against the EPA?
Oh, practical implications are huge, not just for this presidency, for all the presidencies that follow. We have a disturbing tendency in our government now to rule by unelected bureaucracy, where these bureaucracies take these enabling statutes and run with them at the president's behest. If President Obama's administration is cut back, or its power is cut back by the Supreme Court this term, that will have strong implications for the rest of President Obama's term and for the presidencies that follow this. It's a critical series of decisions.